Well, hey there, it's Liz Rohr from Real World NP, and you're watching NP Practice Made Simple, the weekly videos to help save you time, frustration, and help you learn faster so you can take the best care of your patients. So, if you're on YouTube, you're watching, but it's actually an audio recording today of a podcast that I did with my business bestie, Amanda Guarnieri from the Resume RX, and we're going to be talking all about NP mentorship. So, without further ado, I'm going to let her introduce the episode and I hope you get so much out of it.
Hey there, welcome back to the Nurse Becoming podcast. You are listening to episode number 11, and I'm your host, Amanda Guarnieri. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am very excited to introduce to you a guest interview with Liz Rohr from Real World NP. Liz and I are kind of business besties, I guess you could say. She and I both serve nurse practitioners in our businesses in very different but complementary ways. And today in this interview, we are really unpacking the idea of mentorship and support for new graduates, specifically new graduate nurse practitioners. So we talk a little bit about kind of what we see the problems are when it comes to mentorship or lack thereof, and kind of what new nurse practitioners can do to prepare for the transition to practice, because she and I have both gone through this. Granted, it was, years ago, but we both have experienced a transition that could have been better, that we could have kind of identified earlier on. So we're going to unpack that a little bit in this episode and talk about the different types of mentorship opportunities that you as a new graduate can seek out. Because ultimately, a big takeaway from this interview is that we want you to feel empowered to identify when there's a problem or identify when you need support and kind of step in your power to solve it. So we don't want you to feel like you have to be a victim of your circumstance. We want you to feel empowered to ask for what you need when it comes to support. So we really unpack that a lot more in this episode. So we're going to get right into it. As always, if you want to connect with our guest today, you can head to the show notes for this episode for links to Liz's website and her YouTube channel and her Instagram. All of that will be in the show notes. So I can't wait for you to get to meet Liz. So let's dive right in. I am here with Liz Rohr from Real World NP, and I'm super excited to have her here on the podcast so that we can talk all about support and mentorship, specifically for new grad nurse practitioners. So, hey, Liz, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So the funny thing is, and I don't know if it's funny, but Liz and I talk all day, pretty much. We talk back and we text back and forth. We talk on Voxer back and forth. So it feels kind of funny to talk to you more formally, knowing that other people are listening. But just think of it as, everyone gets to have a window into the
our daily
world,
chats.
into our daily chats. Exactly. So Liz, I obviously know you really well, but for my listeners who aren't familiar with you, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you serve the nursing community?
Yeah, so I'm a family nurse practitioner. I've been in practice since 2015, so coming up on 5 years, which is really exciting. And when I was about 3.5 years into practice, I left my last clinic job and decided to start the website realworldnp.com, which is just a website to kind of help bridge that gap between new grad and real world practice of like all the things that we kind of want to know a little bit more about, and then just kind of providing more support for that transition to practice for nurses becoming nurse practitioners.
Awesome. And one thing that's really great about your content is that you cover a wide variety of clinical topics.
Oh, yeah. It's my
And
fave.
it's definitely your bread and butter. You're kind of, we joke that you're the jelly to my peanut butter or something,
Yes.
because I like to cover all the professional and personal topics, whereas Liz is really the go-to person when it comes to clinical topics. So I want to know, and I'm not sure that we've ever really talked about this, but I want to know more about kind of your personal transition from student to practice and maybe how it's influenced the creation of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I became a nurse first. I was a nurse for about 5 years before I went back for my master's, and then I became a nurse practitioner, and I went right into community health, family practice. And I had a really amazing set of coworkers, and my supervisor was great too. My chief medical officer, my medical director were all really great. But the transition to practice was just so rocky. I just felt like, what did I get myself into? And like, just my first year of I mean, I hesitate to talk about how hard it was because I don't want to scare people, but I just feel like that's my whole thing is that I'm just trying to be real is that like it was really tough. I mean, I lost 10 pounds unintentionally because I was so stressed out. But yeah, it was a lot of just constant learning. Like I just, I went into clinic early for like an hour early. I stayed the whole day. I stayed an hour or two late. Yeah. And then I was very lucky to have one of my colleagues who's actually only had one more year of practice above me as a nurse practitioner kind of was a real advocate for me in a lot of ways because not that I just think the transition to practice is really clinic life is so busy, right? And not everybody's thinking about that necessarily. Like there are more like NP, like residency type of programs now, but like everyone's moving so fast, seeing so many patients, they're not necessarily thinking about like how are the ways that we can like support our brand new nurse practitioners or what do they need. And so one of my colleagues helped to advocate for me to advocate for myself, basically to ask for someone to meet with, basically like a nurse practitioner who had experience. And I met with her once a week for about an hour. And that was just really transformational for me because it was just so like I could get all my questions out, all those things, those like backlogged questions that like I couldn't find the answers in a textbook kind of thing.
Mhm.
It was all clinical judgment, clinical practice. And then I just, yeah, it was just like even things that I thought I had quote like figured out, like it was just a lot to like trust myself in that. And so there was a lot of like personal growth and development doing that too, for sure.
And did you feel like it was an issue of expectations? Like, I'm trying to think, do you looking back in hindsight, do you feel like there was something differently you could have done in preparation as a student that would have made that transition easier, or was it just going to be that way regardless and you found a better way to get through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard, and I think about this a lot because I've been precepting students basically since I was a nurse practitioner for about 6 months, just because I inherited a student because somebody left. But I constantly think about this, and it might get a little bit we could get into this, but I think that there are some people have some feelings about nurse practitioner education, right? And they think about like have some critiques of programs and what they could include and what they should include. And then there's also the other side of it where I think that people are kind of too intense about that and they're not necessarily recognizing that that transition to practice comes with MDs, NPs, DOs, PAs, that whole
Mhm.
thing. So it's really hard. I mean, I think the thing that I see the most actually is that nurse practitioner students are really working so hard and they're so dedicated and they kind of like don't give themselves enough credit or enough space and they're kind of constantly like feeling like they're behind the ball and like they're always like working and working and working and working. So yeah, it's not necessarily about like doing more. I think it is a little bit of an expectation. And I mean, that's why I'm a super advocate of people getting some sort of mentorship and advocating for themselves if they're not, because I'm trying to kind of give them what I received as a gift myself, of like, you deserve this support and like, here's one way to do it. I mean, I'm trying my best to make the transition easier by filling in a lot of the clinical gaps, but I feel definitely torn about this.
Yeah, definitely. I think you and I have both talked about this and acknowledged the fact that, our businesses basically exist to help ease that transition from student to practice because we both recognize that I don't want to say that there are flaws, but that there is room for improvement when it
Yeah,
comes to supporting new nurse practitioners. And I think it sounds like the opportunity that you were able to get was kind of a natural born mentorship um, experience. So I was hoping that we could kind of talk about the different types of mentorship experiences because, for anyone who's an NP student or a new graduate NP who's looking for this type of support, it can look different. It can be provided by your employer, it could be
totally.
something you seek out on your own. So, what are like some of the different ways that you see new NPs being able to find that type of support and mentorship?
Yeah, there are just so many ways. I mean, I think that there are nurse practitioner residency programs, right? Where that's a specific, if your listeners aren't familiar, like you can apply to a program, and there's getting more and more of them now where it's like a year long program or a 2 year long program, and they kind of have a similar format where you get into either a group, a cohort of new nurse practitioners. You have like classes that go along with it. You meet together to talk about cases, things like that. You have like an attenuated schedule or a reduced schedule, so that you don't have to see as many patients. So you get more time. I think another thing I was really lucky to have is that my boss was very understanding. So not only were they accommodating to block my schedule during the day for an hour to have those once a week to have those mentoring conversations, but they also had a really kind of slower ramp up process where I had enough time to kind of get my bearings underneath me for a couple of months. Yeah, and then there's different mentoring, at least what I've discovered, there's paid mentoring, there's free mentoring, there's a couple different groups that do it. There's this program called Maven. I'd love to give a shout out to them. And they work, it's expert physicians who are retired, who are like volunteering their time basically to mentor. And it's a program that federally qualified health centers can apply to, and like rural health and things like that. I mean, there's just so many options. Like you can find people through nurse practitioner groups and stuff on Facebook and things like that. But I think everyone brings a different level of commitment, right? So like it's hard. There are a lot of options, but it's hard to pick sometimes. And I think like the
Yeah.
main thing for nurse practitioner residencies is the main issue that I've seen is that like you might have to take a pay cut or you might have to move or they're competitive, but there's also some online stuff. There's a lot of options, but
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of options. And I think that, one of the main points that I think you and I would both like to make is that we want new NPs to be aware of these options and to
Mhm.
be proactive in seeking them out,
Yeah.
because a lot of times this is not going to be something like you were very fortunate to have the experience that you did. And I wouldn't say that it like fell into your lap, but it was kind of like it happened out of
Well, yeah, I had
circumstance.
encouragement. Yeah, like, I had
Right.
people telling me, like, "This is what you should do." I was just like,
Exactly.
Christina, like, I'm so overwhelmed." And she's like, "Well, are you meeting with somebody?" I'm like, "I didn't
Right.
know. I had no
Yeah, and I think
idea."
that if we can help like set that expectation early, it can be something that, ideally is negotiated or discussed
Yes,
before someone even
yes.
accepts a job. And, these mentoring relationships can develop naturally, with someone that you work with in the clinic setting or someone that you know from, some other connection. You can certainly hire someone to be a paid mentor who you can meet with. And there's also, a lot of power in having a peer group. Like
Yeah.
let's say your cohort of graduates, you all graduate together and, let's say you form a group and you set like a standing, once a month Zoom chat or even in person chat if you're all local to one another. I think that there's a lot of power in kind of collective experience when it comes to going through that transition. And that's part of what's really valuable about the residency programs. I used to be on faculty at a residency program back in my previous institution, and it was an ER residency program. And what we noticed was before we had established the residency, the new grads were not being successful. There was really high turnover, really high burnout, especially in emergency medicine, which is a very high paced environment that not all NPs are prepared for in school. Like even 6-month orientation programs were not setting them up
Mhm.
for success.
Well,
So once we had established this program, it really, really helped with retention and
oh,
satisfaction.
that's
And
amazing.
yeah, and a huge portion of it was just like a weekly informal meeting. And it was
Yes.
a small group, 4 residents who would get together and basically just like hash out how they were feeling about the week. Sometimes they would present cases, but it was very informal. It wasn't like formal case presentations
Yes.
and didactic stuff every single week. It was a social time, but with people who were going through the same thing so that they could share that experience. And like just that 1 hour a week, as an observer, because I got to be there, felt so powerful in their growth in the role. Because then, the faculty, we were kind of on the periphery as facilitators and just kind of like guiding the conversation. But all of it was, all that growth happened, just through the peers being together, which I feel was so, so valuable and kind of underrated. Like, I'm not sure that new grads realize that they could just,
You
take
could just do
that.
this.
You can
Yes.
just do it. Like,
Yeah,
make
well,
the
I
decision
was
and do
gonna
it.
say, like, 2 things. One is that I am in a lot of Facebook groups online, which you know, and I ask a lot of questions. I'm curious. I'm kind of obsessed with, like, this transition to practice and how where people are at and all this stuff. And I had asked a question a couple of months back about, like, if you had done a nurse practitioner residency and like, would you do it? Or, like, what did you like about it? I can't remember what the question was, but basically the feedback was, like, it was all about that, like, that was the best part, and for
Mhm.
me, the same so I actually worked with 2 Christinas when I first started working. Christina, my mentor, who had a year more of experience, and then another Christina who worked at the, same day, who started the same day I did as a brand new grad, and, like, when Christina, like, the mentor had her day off, my peer Christina and I would just be like, "What do you think?" You know, like, "What do you think?" And so we would just kind of, like, try to figure it out, and that was so helpful, and then when I had a couple of years there, there was another kind of cohort of new grads that came through that all started around the same time, and they had those weekly meetings too, and they found that that was just really, really helpful. And I think just like having those close knit, like coworker settings, even if they're not new grads with you, like that is so supportive. And like I'm so glad we're talking about this because this is something that is accessible, like so completely accessible, something that somebody can do for themselves, you know, because I feel
Definitely.
like there's so much frustration and powerlessness sometimes that come into being a new grad. And like this is completely within your power, especially if you're talking about like you're graduating in P class. Like, I don't know, my school was like, we all loved each other. I mean, maybe not 100%, but you know, those
Yeah.
are out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, a big thing that overshadows new grads is this imposter syndrome. And I think it's really easy to become a victim of your mindset in that sense. Imposter syndrome is a very real thing, but sometimes you need to very intentionally take back control of something in order to push through something that's uncomfortable. And I feel like, setting up a peer group is something super easy that anybody could do to really kind of, like you said, kind of like step into that power of taking control over the situation because it's so, so easy to just kind of fall in this negative feedback loop of, negativity essentially
Yeah.
about like, woe is me, things are miserable, I can't do anything to change it. And then it just kind of spirals
Yeah.
out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like sometimes it blows my mind. And again, maybe it's just because I'm like obsessed with this problem and serving those communities that I serve. But people will post things and be like, I thought it was just me. And I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
how long have you been in this Facebook group for? Unfortunately, it's like there's a very specific transition in the practice that happens with like imposter syndrome and like I don't know, just like I can use the like people use the same words even, you know? So it just breaks my heart when people don't see that and like that community is so accessible.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is a good segue to this. You sent me a screenshot the other day
Yes.
from
I did.
one of these groups that we are mutually in, where we, try to help facilitate positive
Yes.
conversations and spread resources the best that we
Yes.
can. And so you took a screenshot of this post in a Facebook group, and it says, I'm a new grad leaving a job after 3 months. It's not at all what they promised. I'm seeing 20 patients a day, no time to chart, some ethical issues, the way they treat patients. I have a contract obligation to stay 90 days. I will have 6 months experience by then. If anyone has a similar situation, what did you do in the future? Why did, explaining why you left, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and, you know, we laughed not out of making fun of the individual, but
Yeah, no,
out of
not at
kind
all.
of like out of like
Pain and
commiseration.
frustration.
Yeah,
Yes.
frustration, the fact that we see and hear this message so often that it is literally like the sole thing that we are both trying
Yeah. It
to
was like a meme. I
prevent.
mean, it was like a literal
Yeah.
like, you could just copy and paste this, and this has been posted so many times, and
Mhm.
it's just heartbreaking, and it's like the thing you just have to laugh about so you don't cry, you know?
Yeah.
It's like it's horrible. It's a horrible experience.
So, in your opinion, like, what can somebody do to, first of all, let's talk about like what could somebody do not to get to this point? Like, how could this situation, what are the points where there could be prevention? of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, your business exists for this reason, which is what I shared in
Yes.
my stories. I don't know, I think that you and I are in similar situations in some ways because we are so aware and so passionate about it, and yet we're still feeling like we're not necessarily reaching people, right? I think it's just that I think it's the information is out there, and I think it's just, like, making sure that people, like, know that this is a thing to kind of prepare for is like, it's brand new. Like this is not like applying as a nurse, this is not applying for basically any other job in my life. This is completely different. And there's negotiation, there's contracts, there's like a whole process of onboarding, there's credential. It's like a whole thing. So I think that if people can acknowledge that this is going to be a very different transition and just kind of prepare themselves with like the resources that are out there, free, paid, any of that stuff, like people that they know, like they can just acknowledge that this is different and learn what's different and then do their best to kind of like look out for those pitfalls and practice those things, then like they're going to be in a much better place, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think, well, one other thing I want to add is you and I talk about this a lot. There is so much mindset involved, and like we're deep in it, so I know. But like and this also what breaks my heart a lot, and I talk about with a lot of I work with I mentor some people one on one, and that's like one of the huge things about this transition to practice is that it's not just clinical; it's like who you are and like
Mhm.
your brand new role of being the person at the end of the line. Like they're going to come to you, you're sitting at your desk and the front desk is going to come to you and say, the lab has an issue with this, or this patient has an issue with this. And that's you. Like there's nobody else. Like I would look around and be like, wait, where's the doctor? And it's me. It's literally me. So it's like, there's that. And then you're supervising people. Like this is just like a whole thing. So I think it's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of self-belief that needs to go into it too, right? And so it's like you need to like know that you're worth it, believe that you're worth it, or at least work on that, and then get the tools that you need to make sure that you're not in those situations, which is very
Yeah.
easy for us to talk about all the time, but
Right. I know, definitely. I think that like there are opportunities to use these tools and resources to prevent yourself from getting into a really bad spot, like prevent yourself from taking a bottom of the barrel job with unethical expectations that where everyone is overworked and underpaid and their turnover is 3 months for an NP. Like there are some, and you and I have talked about this, like there are red flags that you can pick up on in advance to make sure that you don't continue down the path of the hiring process with a job that
yes.
looks like this.
Or like have a
Um,
contract. Like I talked to I got so many DMs after I posted that, and people were like telling me about horrible things, and I was like, well, is it in your contract? And they're like, what?
mm, mm,
Seriously?
yeah.
Oh, it's so sad. It's so sad.
I know. And I feel like so not only can you be more mindful about your job search strategy and make sure that you are interviewing every job that you go on an interview for, like making sure that you're paying attention to these things. And then beyond that, making sure that if you decide to move forward, that you are negotiating for the time, orientation time. You're negotiating, like it's in your contract, how many patients you're going to start seeing and, how quickly they're going to escalate you and how much admin time you're going to get. Like these are all things that are in your power to decide. So that's kind of like, I feel like my neck of the woods is like all that pre stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like, how do you make sure that you are vetting every opportunity and negotiating for what you want and making sure that you're being selective with the job that you choose? And then I feel like on your end, it's kind of like because even if you find the perfect job, like you're still going to have that role transition. There's no perfect job that's
Yeah.
going to protect you from that. And I
I
think
know.
that's where like the expectations come in. And then kind of like, I feel like your resources and the things that you provide and the mentorship discussion that we're having right now is like what happens after you start the job. Even if it's the perfect job, you're still going to have to
Oh, yeah.
actively, you know, go through this
Imposter
transition and you're still going to exactly you're going to have imposter syndrome and you're going to need some sort of support. So it's like, do you decide what support you want and need ahead of time? Maybe, but more likely you're going to be in the job working and realize I need help. Hello, my friend. How are you today? We have been talking all about new grads here on the Nurse Becoming podcast. And specifically, we've been focusing our message towards new grad nurse practitioners. And this makes me so happy. I love that I get to support you throughout your nursing journey. And, nurse practitioners are a little bit near and dear to my heart because I am one. And speaking of new nurse practitioners, I have created a 3-day online bootcamp that is going to be super helpful for all of you NP students and new NPs that are listening and getting ready to start the job search. We are going to be covering some essential topics for new NPs as you get ready to start your search. And this is going to be over 3 days in a live stream format. So you will get to be there with me. You can ask me questions, and I'm going to teach you something new every day so that you can really feel prepared to conquer this next new phase in your career. So the first day, we're going to talk about oversaturation and some mindset things. The next day, we will talk more about your job search strategy in particular. And third day, we are going to talk about what you need to do to prepare your resume and your cover letter. This bootcamp is totally free, by the way. I was going to charge for it, decided that you really needed this for free. So to sign up, you can go to theresumérx.com/bootcamp. You can sign up, again, totally free. I am so looking forward to seeing you there and helping you through these struggles. So let's get you ready for your job search and transition to practice together. And so what do you feel like is the first step for that person who is practicing? They've taken the job, whether it's, their dream job, whether it's kind of just a stepping stone job. If they feel like they're not supported, what's the first thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, actually, this is one of the DMs that I got. She was like she's so sweet. She's basically getting paid per patient.
Mm,
Like, only if the patient arrives, she's only getting paid a certain amount, and she isn't getting enough support. She's seeing too many people, and she was like, the first thing it did was like, "I thought of you." And then you posted the story. It was like me. It was yeah, I was very touched, but I feel very sad for her. But I think the first step is to speak up. It comes back to you believing that you're worth it and you deserve it. And I think that I only felt like that because I had somebody who was like, "No, listen, you need this. You need to do
yeah.
this." Like, this is what you need to ask for. This is reasonable, and you should have block time for it. Not everybody's going to accommodate that, and you have to do some negotiation and like all that stuff. But I think that there needs to be some like firmness of belief, and like that's reasonable to ask for, and it's worth doing. But I think it depends, like if it's unethical or not, right? And are you compromising your license? Because those are situations you really want to get out of quickly. And I also acknowledge that it's very hard if you're the sole provider for your family, right?
Definitely.
It took you a year to find this job. So I definitely have a lot of empathy for that situation. But yeah, I think it has to do with speaking up, and then at least that is the only paradigm that I have, is that somebody kind of took me under their wing and told me what to do, and so that's what I'm trying to do and like tell people. But there's other ways to do it, but I just feel like that is such a good model. And then like that peer group, like you were talking about, like that would be amazing to just start. You know?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, one of the most valuable qualities, I think, in a new graduate, or actually, any healthcare provider or any person actually, is to be able to say that you don't know, to be
Hmm.
able to say, like, okay, I confidently know what I know, and I confidently know what I don't know. And I'm willing to say, like, I don't know. I need to look this up. Like, that's very admirable. And I think that along the same lines, being able to say, I can't do this and I need
Yeah.
help.
Yes.
Um, there is so much fear and weakness and unworthiness attached to
Hmm.
saying that, but really what it is pushing through something that's difficult and uncomfortable and bravely saying that you need support and help.
Yeah.
So I think that, it would be really easy to talk yourself out of asking for help, and then you end up kind of you end up sacrificing, parts of yourself in
Yourself.
order
Exactly. And I think
to
it's
make it
so
work.
hard as caregivers. Like, nurse practitioners are nurses and we're caregivers, and we wanna help everybody, right? I can even touch into my own new grad self of feeling like I'll just put up with it. Like, I'm lucky to have this
Yeah.
job versus like where I am now. I'm not gonna Yeah, like maybe I'm a diva, but I'm just like, I'm not gonna see like 45 patients a day. I'm not even gonna see more than 20. Like, I'm cool. I'm chilling with 20 right now. I'm not gonna see 30. I'm just not gonna do it.
And you can feel too emotions at the same time. You can feel fortunate and grateful to have
Mhm.
employment and also feel like you're not being treated correctly. Like one does not have to negate the other, but I feel like sometimes we're like, "Oh, I don't want to I will feel guilty if I seem ungrateful because I'm so
Yeah.
grateful to be employed in a
Yeah.
time when, the market is difficult or, people are being laid off or whatever it is." You are allowed to feel both of those emotions. Like both of those things are independently valid. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's a hard shift to get over is to feel like, okay, if I speak up and say that I'm not satisfied, it's taking away from my gratitude for employment or
Yeah.
um, whatever that
And it's
is.
hard because, like, I think the other part of it is that healthcare is a business, right? And, like, I totally empathize, and I think that that empathy comes a lot for nurse practitioners as well, of just, like, feeling so empathetic for how other people are feeling, right? And at least
Hmm.
for me, like, I can recognize from my chief medical officer's perspective, from my CEO's perspective, we need to see patients. Like, that is
Right.
how a clinic makes money is when providers see patients. That's like 70% of our revenue, 30% is the other from like grants and stuff because I work in an FQHC and maybe that's the case for private practices too. But like I have a lot of empathy for that. But at the same time, like the goal, I think most clinics are looking for somebody that they can train, they can support, they can help grow, and who's going to stay there for a long time. I mean, who knows? I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think that they're in it to hire somebody for a year and then they leave, right?
Right.
Like
No.
they have a vested interest because it takes so much money to train somebody. Like I think there's some stat about nurses, like a brand new RN is like $90,000 to train a new nurse, right? And
Hmm.
I imagine it's very similar for nurse practitioner, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's, a good period of time where you as an NP are not yet profitable to the practice.
Yeah,
And I feel like that time frame is at least 6 months,
yeah,
if not longer. And what I really struggle with our profession in general and how we're paid and how the business of healthcare is, I feel
yeah.
like it's really easy to internalize that your worth is connected to your productivity,
Yes.
which is, a message that I've heard in all different circles, personal development circles and, motherhood circles. Like
Oh,
your
yeah.
worth is not tied to how many of the chores you get done or how much laundry you get
Mhm.
done. Like from a motherhood perspective, like you are worthy regardless of how much you do.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a career, in a profession where our literal monetary worth is
Mhm.
tied to our productivity, like
Yes.
it's
It's
so hard not to internalize that.
oh my god, absolutely, absolutely, and I think, like, it depends, like, and this maybe getting nitty-gritty, but, like, in a private practice, in some ways or in an FQHC setting, we have mostly Medicaid insurance, and so literally we are paid per person, basically, that we see, and it doesn't matter how sick they are versus how well they are, versus in some
Mhm.
other settings, depending on the billing codes, you might be able to get reimbursed more, and, like, that is different, but yeah, I mean, regardless of whatever setting you're talking about, it's definitely like a benchmark of how you've and like they report stats, you know, like I get my
Yeah.
stats of how many patients I've seen and what my no show rate is and how my quality measures are and all that stuff. So there's definitely a lot of you have to do a lot of your own mental work there for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And coming back to the things that a new grad could do when they're like when they notice that they're in a situation where they need support, I think that we talked about like reaching out to peers can be really helpful, and the fact that you had that coworker who was able to process this with you and say, are you getting support? This is something that you need to ask for this. I think that it drives home the point that you need to have some sort of support network that of people who are not directly responsible for your employment.
Yeah.
Like, so someone who's either a colleague in the sense that you don't directly report to them. Because I feel like in the workplace, if you're in a larger clinic setting where there are multiple advanced practice providers, that, those people could be kind of the perfect people to be your support network if you
Yeah.
trust them and you feel like they will keep your conversations confidential. And also having, I think, a support group or a peer network who's like really objective and they don't work with you. I feel like
Yeah.
that can be super helpful as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. And I feel like it just reminds me about like the expectations and going into this. Like these are conversations you can have before you accept your job. You know what I mean? you can talk about, like, what is it like? Have you had new grads before? Like, have you ever worked with a nurse practitioner period before? If you're walking into that kind of situation, like, you need to design this job because
Mhm.
they don't know what nurse practitioners, they don't know what that's like, and if you can have those conversations earlier on and you have a framework of like what exactly you're looking for, it's not going to be a surprise when you get started and you're like, oh God, this is
Yeah.
too much.
How many positions have you had as an NP? I'm
Two.
curious. 2. And was there anything that you did during the hiring process for either? Like, what did you learn from your first position that you took into the process the second time around?
Oh my gosh, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything for my first job. I applied to online postings. I went for an interview. I did terribly, but I still got hired. And then I was like, "Oh, there's a contract? Oh, okay, I'll read it." Oh my gosh. So I was very lucky because I was walking into just like a regular old practice, right? That just had a standard contract that was very generous. Like I had 4 weeks of vacation. I had admin time. I had, I think, 6 hours of admin time compared to 34 hours of working hours. Yeah. And like insurance. And there was like all this different productivity stuff in there, but it wasn't like super intense because it's a federally qualified health center. Again, like the productivity is, it depends on the clinic, but I didn't know any of that stuff basically going in, and I was very lucky that I had this kind of standard, really good deal. But going in the second time, I think that I had the luxury of a partner to fall back on for income so that I was detached from my negotiation process for my income.
Mm,
I was like, "I just want this." They were like, no." And I was like, "Well, how about this?" And I just like, I felt very chill. And I was like, "No,
yeah.
I don't really need this job." I mean, I did need the job, but I just was like way more chill about it this time. And I just was a lot more gutsy in terms of asking for what I actually wanted. And I pushed back a couple of times. And it was still a federally qualified health center, which like, in theory, like doesn't necessarily have a budget, right?
Right. So
So I feel
did that pay off? Like, were you able to successfully negotiate things because you were gutsier that time?
Oh, yeah. So, well, I mean, I didn't get the rate that I wanted, but I didn't expect it to be that high anyway. I went for basically like private practice pay, and they were like,
Mhm.
I don't think so. But I interviewed for a full-time position, and I actually the reason I left my last job is because I was really burnt out, and my clinic had really high acuity patients, and this job still has high acuity patients, but they're just different. And I was like, I'm like, oh my god, do I have to leave nurse practitioner? Like I just was so burnt out. I wasn't taking good care of myself. That's a long story, but anyway, so when I walked into this job, I was like interviewing for a full time position, and I actually got literal pain in my chest when I was offered the position because
Oh
I
my
was like,
gosh.
I can't work full time. I can't do it. So I was like, I'll work 20 hours, and they were like, sure. So it was amazing because I just like decided what I wanted and I asked for it. I mean, but I also had way more confidence than I did, and I believed in my abilities. I knew I could hit the ground running, and like I've worked in that setting before. I know the ins and outs. Like I didn't need necessarily like a ton of orientation, and I knew that was to my benefit. So
Mm,
I think I understood their perspective a little bit better about what they are looking for in a provider and like what leverage I had.
yeah, definitely. I'm wondering if at either of your, positions, did you ever do a shadow shift?
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. I meant to mention that. Every single time I interviewed, my second time around, I did a shadow shift, at least 4 hours.
I feel like that's
It's the
like,
way to
the secret
go. It's
weapon. Yeah.
100%. I mean, it's hard because you can't necessarily get all the information that you want, right? I've taken some challenging jobs in my lifetime, and some of them you just can't tell. And like this one nursing position looked like a fairyland, and then I started and it was the hardest unit in the entire hospital system, but it
Oh
looked
my
fine
gosh.
because it was so quiet when I was there because they were all busting their butts the whole time. So if I'd done a shadow shift, I probably wouldn't have done that, right? But
Yeah.
one job I really, really, really negotiated, but they just couldn't do a less than full-time position. But that was amazing. And the reason I knew it was so amazing because I did that for that shadowing, and I
Mhm.
understood what I was looking for. I knew what questions to ask about the support, like from medical assistants and like how much admin time and like the computer systems they use. I don't know, just like a lot of like nuanced things that I just didn't know the first time, just from the
Yeah,
experience of having worked.
definitely. Yeah, I feel like shadow shifts are it's one of the top things that I recommend that
Absolutely.
everybody does to
And
kind of
everyone's chill.
feel
Like
that out.
no one's ever said no. And I've interviewed
Yeah.
a lot of places.
And if they say no, that should
Yes.
tell you something, right?
Mhm.
Like, "Hi, I'd
Mhm.
like to like, they offer you a job or they say that you're, like, down to one of the last candidates and you ask to have a shadow shift and they say no, like, what does that tell you? Um, so I wanna ask you, if you could wave a magic wand and every nurse practitioner could go through some sort of transition period of time,
Mm.
what and you could just, like, dream it up.
Yeah.
Wh what would that look like to you?
For in their transition to practice?
Yeah. Like, the solution to the problems that you see nurse practitioners going through when it comes to transition to practice and kind of learning clinical skills and that type of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely think it starts with the job search process. Like, just educating yourself about the process and, like, understanding how it's different, contracts, like, all of that stuff, and, like, just getting a sense of what it's actually like to work in the clinic and, like, what you actually want out of that clinic, and then spelling out the orientation process, and it might not be written in stone in your contract, maybe it should be, I did not get that written down, but, having that conversation, knowing going in that's the story, when it comes to the clinical stuff is really, really hard because, like, the stuff you see, it just depends on the day. And, like, because I work with
Mm,
one-on-one with new grads, and the questions that they have are all questions that I had as a new grad, but it's like, how do you pack all that in? I don't know, it's just really tough. I mean, I think if I could wave a magic wand, I would just, download some knowledge into someone's brain with a cord. I mean, I remember when I was a student, I was working one of my clinical rotations, and then a former student had been working there, and she just was talking about she'd been there for about 2 years, and she just like, "I just want to download the knowledge of this MD that she was working with," and I just feel like I hear that all the time, and I feel like that sometimes, of
yeah.
just but I don't know, in terms of the clinical stuff, just I think taking it like, if you have a good setup in your job and you have enough space to learn, I think that's the most important part because there isn't really like, they're already working so hard as nurse practitioners, and they already feel like they're behind, and they're already worried about not knowing enough. But, like, I think it just comes down to, like, having a good setup in your job so that you have enough space and time between patients and mentoring support at home so that you can keep, like, reading and reading and reading because, like, you're gonna do a lot, you know?
Yeah,
That's
definitely. I
not a
think
very good
that's
magic wand answer. I'm a very
no,
like,
I
a
think
huge pragmatist.
no, I think that that's great, and I totally agree that having the space to do the learning because we're telling you that you will need to do the learning. Your learning is not done. You have
Oh,
not
no.
learned you have not learned
No, no.
everything in NP school. There's so much more to learn, and that will be so much easier if you have the space to do it. I mean, it seems like common sense, but it's something that I feel like needs to be spelled out explicitly because,
And don't think that
um
you can hack it because you're really tough, because I know
right.
you are. That's how I was, and, oh, it just pains me when people say that. It's just like, "Just please trust me, please."
Yeah,
Don't try to,
yeah,
like,
for sure.
override that and take this crappy job and, like, like, push yourself too hard because you're gonna burn out, right? And you don't wanna
Yeah.
burn out in 3 or 6 months, right? This is supposedly your lifetime career, right? And yeah, goes over to the
So
heart-centered and peace.
I feel like your videos and your resources and the things that you offer, I feel like are kind of like the next best thing to downloading somebody's knowledge. So,
Thanks.
I'd love for you to take some time and tell us a little bit about like where people can find you and the types of resources that you offer in your business if people want to either learn from you or work with you.
Yes. Well, I was going to say that, like, step 1 in terms of the clinical transition is the lab interpretation crash course, which I'm
Amen.
completely, completely obsessed with. It is so, so, so good. Huge gap in knowledge, unfortunately, for a lot of people. And this is not actually, I want to give that disclaimer again that this is like MDs learn on the job too. There's a lot of on the job learning, but I basically have condensed that. So that's amazing. My website is realworldnp.com. And so the lab course is on there. Also developing some other resources, diabetes workshop coming up. I also have free weekly YouTube videos, and that's on YouTube. YouTube.com/realworldnp. And I do a little bit of one on one mentoring, but unfortunately, the spots are a little bit limited. But yeah, all that stuff is on there. There's the ultimate actually, the first place to start would probably be the ultimate resource guide for the new NP, because I feel like that's like the first question that people have, like, what are the resources that you go to? And so that's why I made that guide. And that's at realworldnp.com/guide. I'm throwing a lot of links at you, but
No,
hopefully
it's
that
okay.
sticks with the
They
the
will
root
all
website.
be They will all be in the show notes. So
Oh, sweet.
wherever you are listening to this episode, you can just click on episode show notes and it'll bring you to that page where we'll list everything with Liz. And to clarify, Liz, the lab interpretation crash course that you're referring, that's your course, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
I
something that
wrote
you
that.
created.
They
Yeah. I mean, I know this because I'm a student in the course.
Yes,
But just for people who may not be
yeah,
familiar with that, tell us a little bit about what that is,
yeah.
because I feel like that's like your big signature flagship
Yes.
offer.
Oh my god, it's so good. So basically, I would open my labs, and I sound really pompous saying that, but it really is it's so funny. I'm working with a mentee right now, and like when we first started working together, she was like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "No, no, no, like you have the access to the course, like all this stuff." And then like afterwards, she was like, "Oh my god, thank you so much for making this." Anyway, sorry, I'm just obsessed. But it's CBCs, CMPs, urinalysis, TSH, lipids, and then I have a brand new endocrine module as well. It's basically all of the main labs in primary care. So when I used to like open up my labs and kind of like have like a calcium of 10.9, and then I'd be like, okay, like what do I do for that? And like Google on up to date. Just look on up to date and read all about it. And basically it's just like all condensed information for people. And it's got like all the handouts and cheat sheets and all this stuff to kind of like help really hit the ground running a little bit faster when it comes to lab interpretation. And I am obsessed with making this transition easier. So there's certainly more things coming, but that's all I have for right now.
Well, don't say that's all you have because it's yeah, it's great. I really think that
Thank
it's
you.
like the ultimate fast track option. I mean, it's you could certainly learn everything that you include in there on your own if you wanted to spend what, like
100 hours,
100
like
hours?
literally
Yeah,
100 hours for the first one, just reading and research, not even putting it together, not recording, not editing, no.
right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty mind blowing. So,
yeah, it's good stuff. Well, I feel like there's so much more that we could talk about
oh my god,
surrounding
we could talk
mentorship
forever.
and support. And just know that even though we're not always recording podcast episodes, we're usually talking about this topic every day.
Yeah.
But oh, and on Instagram, people can follow you too, right?
Yes,
At Real World NP. I feel like
yes.
that's where you, other than like your weekly videos on YouTube, I feel like that's where
I
you
hang out there
hang
the
out the
most,
most
for sure.
socially. So people can connect with you. Well, thank you for formally having this chat with
Yes.
me. It was super fun.
Oh,
Well,
so fun.
maybe we'll
We should have
do
like
it
a
again.
show every week.
I Yeah, if you're listening and you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review. Specifically, you can like request Liz and maybe I will bring her back for another episode,
Yes.
maybe like a regularly occurring segment.
Oh, that'd be so fun. So fun.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you so much. If you made it all the way here, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, definitely head over to Apple, iTunes, podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Look up Nurse Becoming Podcast from Amanda, my friend at there as a Resume RX, and subscribe and leave a review so that more nurse practitioners and nurses can find that podcast. And if you like this video, hit like and subscribe and share with your NP friends so together we can reach as many nurse practitioners as possible to help make their transition to practice a little bit easier. Thank you so much for listening. Hang in there, and I'll see you soon.